Israelism. Now, if you go on the news, remember the situation with the Covington high school kids and the Native American guy, and he was on the drum, and they said it's the MAGA kid, the MAGA hat kids versus the Native American, and then once it came out later, there was a group of 5 or 6 guys who had been cursing at people all day and were actually the instigators of everything. I don't know if you guys followed up on that story. Those are 5 Hebrew Israelites from a group called House of Israel. And if you watch the footage, which I watched all the footage, it's crazy. They're calling the kids incest kids and talking about UFOs coming back. It's just a whole slew of stuff. But they've been instigating all day, and that's really what was going on. But they don't like being called what the media calls them, which is black Hebrew Israelites. So that's the term you hear. They don't like black Hebrew Israelites. They think it's racist or redundant. Now, if you study their history, they used to call themselves black Hebrew Israelites, but now in the modern era, they have a problem with it. So I usually say people who believe in Hebrew Israelism, so not granting their claim that they're true Israelites, you're saying they ascribe to a certain ideology by saying that. But they don't like that term either, but that's okay, because I'm not granting the premise that everybody who came over in the transatlantic slave trade is an Israelite. I don't think there's good evidence for that. And if there was, what would be the spiritual significance in the New Covenant anyway? So that's why the phrase there is Hebrew Israelism. A big way it has spread is the internet. Yes, there's guys who stand out in the corner and yell. Has anyone ever encountered a Hebrew Israelite in the actual street? Oh yeah, there's some pier or dock down there that I see a lot of video from Baltimore. There's one particular, they're out by there's like a body of water right beside it, and there's yeah, I see that camp a lot. They're pretty radical, those ones. Who else is?
In New Jersey, Protestant and different.
Yeah. New Jersey's a hotbed for Hebrew Israelism. In fact, I don't know if you saw in the news, one of the leaders of the main camp just got indicted for some serious embezzlement. $1,000 he owes the government and taxes. His name was Jermaine Grant. He went by Tazadakia, and he taught that he was the Holy Spirit made manifest. So his nickname was Comfy, the Comforter. Where'd you see him at?
Well, it was a former friend. I'll show you a conversation later.
Okay.
It was March 12th at Walmart.
So at Walmart and Hebrew Israelites. I thought it was the place for people with back rolls to go, not Hebrew Israelites.
This is a brother who just graduated from Liberty. Took 4 years from, and he told me that, man, they don't teach us anything about the Bible.
That's standard Hebrew Israelite. They think they took the pill, like the Matrix. They think they've taken that pill.
He kept me hostage for 30 minutes in Walmart. And I said a few things.
That's because you have nothing to teach him. That's why, just so you know. You have nothing to teach him in his mind.
Oh, no.
He needs to teach you.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, you don't have nothing to teach him. It doesn't matter if you had a degree or 2, you have nothing to teach him. Yeah. But last night, he didn't keep us hostage. I kept hostage. Sorry about that. He looked at his phone. I was like, you don't understand. This is a peaceful conversation for this dude. This is a milestone. So who else? Someone else raised their hand and said they ran into him somewhere, I thought.
And then a former pastor that I know, he was trying to get me to come speak at his church. And I was like, he told me a little bit more. Because the thing brought to my attention about the Hebrew Israelites. And I kind of find out he is all about the Hebrew Israelites. He's saying he's of the peaceful sect, but he also tried to connect me
right.
through Facebook. So it was just kind of cool. We had a conversation, and so it's a couple of red flags go up right away. It was kind of detracting away from Jesus, like being the true Messiah. So I'm interested to kind of
Yeah, that's so what you said more of a peaceful sect. So the guys in the street corner are a faction of Hebrew Israelites, but they don't all do that. So the media, if they're going to ever be concerned about Hebrew Israelites, they'll be concerned about those guys saying stuff like that. Call them a hate group and all that. And, okay, but the question is, what's the underlying theology that leads them to do that? So the ones who are peaceful, like Straightway Truth, which that's what part of it's called, Straightway Truth Ministries. They'll be peaceful in the sense that they're not out on a street corner, and they don't teach subjugation of other nations. So who are other nations according to certain Hebrew Israelites? Some have it as anyone who's not African descent, although they say it's so-called African descent because it's not actually African descent on their schema. Other ones have it if you're not black, Hispanic, or Native American. So there's different ways they count or tabulate who they think is part of Israel or not. But other nations, people will say, oh, white people, but it's not just white people. It's if you're white, if you're Indian from India, if you're Arabic, if you're Asian, those also are all not included. Some will say, though, like straightway, but you can be grafted in and be spiritual Israel as long as you don't usurp our authority. Others will say, we're going to reign over you as your masters, and you're going to do slavery for us for all eternity. That's the House of Israel guys out there at the MAGA situation, the Covington situation. They were the latter variety.
Give like a high-level, 30,000-foot overview of what Hebrew Israelism is.
Yes, I'm going to do it through memes. That's my next slide. J.R. Redmond, anyone know who that is? Scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl when the Patriots won, I think 2002. Anybody know? No one knows who this is? That's your friend. Do you know he's a Hebrew Israelite?
He never told me that.
Well, I'm going to show you from his Facebook page. I'm going to show you some memes that he shared. So I figured instead of making it out here, I'll show you actual memes that guys actually promote. Now, how do I know J.R. Redmond? Now, I don't know him like that because I have a group I've started online called Christian and Hebrew Israelite Gospel Discussion Group. It's a Facebook discussion group. Has 40,000 members in it, so it's large. Now, if you come in there, though, be prepared to battle because they're not Mormons. They don't want to cut your grass. They want to beat you up theologically, right? So you better be ready. But J.R. Redmond's in that group. J.R. Redmond's in that group. So my friend was like, "Hey, that's J.R. Redmond." I was like, "Who's J.R. Redmond?" And he told me. I said, "Oh, okay." So I checked out his page. Before I'll show you some pictures. This is J.R. Redmond now. So he's right here where I am. I'm from Arizona, and this is tailor-made. This is Sun Devils with the fringes. How can you mix devils and fringes? I don't know. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so J.R. This is a sign. If you see someone like that, assume they follow Hebrew Israelism in some way, because this is a lot of work. Imagine tailoring all your shirts to put fringes on the bottom. By the way, the fringes are an interesting concept because they'll say, isn't God the same? Well, then why would his law change? Fringes are a perfect example of changes in God's law. Now, God's character doesn't change. The law is an expression of God's character. But the way he wants his people to act out certain things and situations does change depending on where they are at in history. Let me give you an example. Fringes was not given at Sinai. It's not part of Ten Commandments or all the laws and statutes. It was later on, after Israel was unfaithful, he said, now put the fringes on the bottom of your garment to remind you of my faithfulness. And it was a later command to remind them of the covenant. My point is, it shows modifications on the law, even by one of the things they identify with. But they'll ask, they'll say, oh, you keep the law? Where's your fringes at? That's a common Hebrew Israelite phrase. Where's your fringes at? It's almost like, did you read your Bible today? It's almost like that kind of thing. Well, this is from J.R. Redmond's page. Now, did Michelle Obama actually hold the sign? No, you know how they do memes, right? They'll have a sign and they put in something in it. You are Hebrews, not African Americans, which is ironic considering her husband. This makes her husband outside of Israel because he's Kenyan. You see what I'm saying? Now, Hebrew Israelites teach that the way you show you're an Israelite is if you fulfill the curses. If you go to Deuteronomy 28, what you'll see is in the beginning, it says, if you do this law, you'll be blessed. Do this, blessed in the city, blessed in the field. If you don't, you'll be cursed with ramifications of diseases, and your children are going to wild out, and people are going to take your land, and your kings are going to get captured, which you see fulfilled in the pages of the Old Testament. All this stuff happened in the Old Testament. They leapfrog past the Old Testament fulfillment of these curses happening to Israel and go to the transatlantic slave trade. And they'll say, what people group does it sound like this happened to? And then they get to verse 68. And that's where they really get you. If you've never seen this before, when they get to Deuteronomy 28:68, they think it's game over. Because here's what it says. And the Lord will bring you back in ships to Egypt, the journey that I promised that you should never make again. And there you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but there will be no buyer. Now, they would like the KJV. They don't use any other modern translation. I have the ESV. The ESV is a little more accurate to the Hebrew. And so some people say, if you talk to Hebrew Israelites, only use the KJV. I say no, because I wanted to hear a better translation, so I'll go with that first, and then I'll interact with their KJV. Just because they use the KJV doesn't mean not to be beholden to it. Doesn't mean I disrespect it, just means I don't have to be beholden to it just because they are. Some people teach otherwise. To me, I say, use the best translation available so they're exposed to it. So let's break down this verse real quick, because this is the key thesis of Hebrew Israelism. Black folks in the Western Hemisphere are the true Israelites. And there are spiritual ramifications to that. That's a central thesis. Verse 68, and the Lord will bring you back. So you can't go to a place you've never been to before and go back to it. Meaning, where's slavery in the transatlantic slave trade? It's in the Western Hemisphere. Can you go back to a place you haven't been is what I ask them. Because it says back in ships to Egypt. Now, they'll say slave ships. Now, it doesn't say slave ships. It says ships. I'm just saying. But they'll say enslaved ships. Don't insert a word in there because it doesn't say slave ships. It just says ships. But that's how they make it more powerful. It says you're going to go to Egypt. They'll say, well, Egypt means house of bondage, so it's just saying we're going to go back into slavery. So it's sort of metaphorical. But the ships in the middle of the sentence are literal. So the ships are literal, but the bondage, Egypt, is not literal. But if you look at Deuteronomy 28, Egypt is used two other times. You have the boils of Egypt, you have the plagues of Egypt. It's literal both times. So why we get here is all of a sudden it doesn't actually mean the land of Egypt. But that's what they have to do because Egypt is America or wherever Africans were enslaved. Jamaica, Dominican Republic, see what I'm saying? So it's just important to draw that to their attention, challenge them on this. How could you go back to a place you've never been? Why are the ships literal, but Egypt is not? You're switching literally in the space of a couple words. A journey that I promise that you should never make again. Yahweh had told them, hey, you'll be free, But it's saying that if you disannul the covenant, you'll experience the covenant curses, which shouldn't have to happen, but this is what will happen to you. And there, which emphasizes the fact, again, that it's something that already happened. A journey that I promise you should never make again. They never made a journey to the Americas. Where was the journey? It was on foot, not on ships, but the journey was Israel from Egypt. The journey back would be Israel to Egypt. See what I'm saying? So, again, it's clear that you should never make again, and there you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves. Now, that is a common thing. If you look at the slave laws in the Old Testament, they mainly have to do about people in hardship who had to sell themselves into slavery as a way to get out of bondage or debt, and then they would work themselves out of the debt. That was the general design of slavery if you read the Old Testament laws. The other exception is prisoners of war. So instead of killing them, they become enslaved to the victor. But here is a common ancient practice, selling yourselves into slavery, which is more true to the Hebrew. The KJV is more ambiguous, so it's not as clear that the person is selling themselves into slavery. But it makes sense of the next line. If you're trying to get out of debt, you don't have any money, and you're selling yourself into slavery, then you would want there to be a buyer because you're working yourself out of financial bondage. Do you see that? You want a buyer. You're not being captured into slavery, and you wouldn't want a buyer. You want a buyer. But part of the curse is, there shall be no buyer. See, to say if you make it that you're being captured and then sold into slavery, wouldn't it be good if there's no buyer? And besides, in the transatlantic slave trade, weren't there buyers? In fact, that's why they stopped just dealing with the kings of some of the nation states in Africa directly and started kidnapping later on because the demand increased, meaning there was lots of buyers. So the reading of this being the transatlantic slave trade does not work, but this is a key verse. And so the way you determine who's a Hebrew Israelite is not by DNA, not by culture, lineage, language, by who fulfills the curses. That's what they'll say. That's the key thing. And Deuteronomy 28 is their main place.
What did they say, though, that they were originally Native Americans in America that went to Africa?
Solomon had a great navy, and the navy went over to the Americas and never came back. Native Americans. Now, that sounds ridiculous to us, but Mormons. When America came over here and encountered Native Americans, they didn't know what to make of them. And so some of the missionaries were like, maybe these are the lost tribes of Israel, the northern tribes, and maybe we could see a return to God by Israelites if we witness to these Native Americans. My point is, it was common in the water, actually, to a certain extent early in American history, to postulate. In fact, there's books on it. A famous one's called A View of the Hebrews, where Joseph Smith plagiarized it. Why do I mention Mormons? Why do I mention Joseph Smith? Because in Mormon doctrine and Mormon history, one of the key tenets is that the Native Americans were Hebrews who came over at a certain time during, I think, the Assyrian or Babylonian invasion into America. My point is, Hebrew Israelism has the same silly idea about Native Americans, which, again, DNA does not show. Native Americans don't have any Semitic DNA. They don't have any DNA that could have originated from what's called the Levant area. But they don't pay it. DNA is irrelevant to most Hebrew Israelites. They would say they still fulfill the curses. Those who include them. Remember, not all groups include them. They have different schemas. But everyone includes black folks in the Western Hemisphere, every type of Hebrew Israelite. So that's a key thing. So when someone says, oh, didn't Africans sell us? And I said, no. Those were Hamites. Those are Cushites. We're Semites. Those aren't our brothers. That's why they sold us. That's how it works. So there's a small anti-African sentiment in Hebrew Israelism. It's actually anti-African. Someone, yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to ask a question for clarity. So is your presentation to us today to sort of give us an apologetic against this, or just the awareness that it could be on our team?
Both, hopefully. What do you want?
Well, I mean, if you're saying that we're never going to convince them otherwise because we don't have anything to teach.
No. You do have something to teach them. I'm saying that's a lot of times a mentality. But I mean, have you ever witnessed to a Muslim?
Sure.
How is it?
It's the same way.
It's a challenge, right? But do Muslims come to Jesus Christ? That guy right there, Reza. I was saying that's their mentality, but Jesus breaks down those strongholds. So, like, I'm not agreeing with that mentality. You know what I'm saying? I'm not agreeing for a second. In fact, I played him a video last night, and one of the people speaking, I said, hear that guy? He said, yeah. I said, that's an ex-Hebrew Israelite who now is an apologist. And he said, really? An ex-Hebrew Israelite? So it happens. In fact, a big part of it is you giving a counterpunch. Hebrew Israelites rely on sneak attacks, by and large. You don't understand what they're talking about. Generally speaking, you don't understand what they're saying. You don't know what's going on. So they expect to bring an obscure passage with an obscure interpretation, punch you, and you're basically done because you've never seen this before. You got caught off guard. If you respond back with a counter exegesis and a better response, I'm not saying everyone, but most of them aren't even prepared for one answer back. And so hopefully you could do a little bit of this. And I'm going to give everyone who wants it, I brought about a dozen copies of my book, which will help you. I'm going to give whoever wants one. So here's another one from J.R. Redmond's page, just to reiterate the same idea. And a lot of times you've got to check Hebrews like memes. I know you can't read this. What this is saying is that a lot of the slaves who came over from West Africa, it's saying, look, according to the slave names, a bunch of their names end in Yah, so therefore it shows the Hebrew roots even in the names of the slaves. That's what this is about. And then Isaiah 65:15 is used as a proof text for that. But if you read Isaiah 65:15, and you got to read it in conjunction with Isaiah 62:2, what you see about the name is it's Yahweh saying, you won't have my name upon you anymore. He's saying that you won't be my people, which Paul speaks about in Romans 10. He says, a people who were not my people will be called my people. And what's going on there? It's about the basically departure of many Jews from the true faith of Israel and the inclusion of Gentiles into the faith. That's what Isaiah 65 and 62 are about. It has nothing to do with people's individual names or anything like that. But they commonly will use some passage because who knows Isaiah 65:15 off the top of your head, right? And if you go there, you'll be like, oh, it doesn't mention name. But if you look into, this doesn't mean Africans are gonna, it doesn't mean what they're saying it means. I'm just showing you that one to show you the kind of things they think are evidence, and you've always got to check. And let's just say there's some kind of Yah sound at the end of some of the names. What does that prove? There's similar sounds in different languages phonetically, but it's a logical error to say something phonetically sounds the same, therefore has the same meaning. Especially when these languages, they're different languages. There's different languages even within the Bantu peoples themselves. Bantus are West African people. So what would it mean if there's Yah at the end? Because they weren't Hebraic names anyway. It's not even good argumentation. Another JR. Meme. Black Israel, behold, the black people who wrote the Bible. I always thought God wrote the Bible. My point by saying that, though, is that Hebrew Israelism takes the center of the Bible from being God and Christ to being Israel and the people. They take the center character off and make themselves the center character. So sometimes we call that narcigesis. Have you guys ever exegesis? We call it narcigesis. And so what they'll do is show an ancient depiction of an Israelite, and by the power of suggestion, be like, oh, look, they're black. But here's the thing. If you look at all kinds of ancient depictions of Israelites, you see them looking like a lot of people in the Middle East today. The world's not black and white. That's a Jim Crow mentality, the idea of you're black or you're white. Travel to the Middle East and try to categorize everyone according to that schema. It won't work. So, yes, Hollywood and Western art is false, generally speaking, in its depictions of Jesus and Israelites. True. And Egyptians, that's true. But that doesn't mean by default then everyone looked like they were of African descent. In fact, when you see Egyptians do things like depict the Nubians who they often fought, the Nubians were known as great bowmen, long bowmen, and you can see battles they would have. The Egyptians look different than even the Nubians. The Nubians are lighter with some more slender features, almost like the way you might picture an Egyptian, except, don't picture, Elizabeth, whatever her name was, Taylor or something like that. Picture an Egyptian with the proper skin tone. The Nubians look more like so-called someone from sub-Saharan Africa, but even that, these categories are weird. People on the west coast of Africa don't look like people on the east coast of Africa. Ethiopians look different than a lot of other Africans. Why? Because on the continent of Africa, you have the greatest genetic diversity out of anywhere in the world. You have the very tall Kenyans from certain tribes, and you have the very small pygmies. So my point is that you'll see stuff like this. Therefore, what this revelation tells us is the Bible is the black man's history book. So it centers everything, but that can be an empowering message. If you're disenfranchised in the history of the United States, it's to tell you you're this, you're always second, it says, oh, guess what? The United States traditionally has thought the Bible was important. Well, guess what? You guys didn't know. We're the center of the Bible. It's like an inversal of authority and prominence. Another example, Sunday. And so he quotes, this is again, all from JR's page. He quotes something about where a Roman Catholic guy in the 1880s basically says, hey, Rome is the one who gave you Sunday. A few things about that. It's the 1880s. What day Christians are mainly meeting on got decided as far as general practice way before the 1880s. So it's not relevant to the discussion of the history of when Christians gather. Furthermore, you can even see in the pages of the New Testament, Christians gather on Sunday. It's never mandated. We just see the practice show up. 1 Corinthians 16, on the first day of the week when I come to you, Paul says, have the money ready for the church so we ain't got to waste time doing collections, right? You just want to get it out of the way. That's an example. John says, when I was caught up on the Lord's Day. The Lord's Day is to be identified with the first day. Why the first day? Because early in the morning, on the first day of the week, that's when they encountered the risen Jesus. But Paul also says, don't judge a man by his day. Don't judge him by his new moon. Don't judge him by his Sabbath. This is Romans. This kind of talk is replete in the Bible. All time is God's. You could do Saturday worship, but they make it where if you meet on a Sunday, it's essentially damnable. That's what Hebrewism does. But what's the new covenant message? It's different, and they try to explain away all those verses. If you just look up the discussion of days and celebrations in the New Testament, you'll see this is not the message of Sabbatarians. This is a different message. There's much greater freedom in Christ. But Hebrew Israelism wants to bring you back into bondage of the law, which what did Paul say to Peter? You haven't been able to do it. Why are you trying to put it on the Gentiles? We couldn't do it. And then Paul says, I kept the law, Philippians 3. But that's rubbish to me. That's rubbish.